Welcome to Congo Unfiltered, y'all. Happy Saturday. I am Gaëtan Nzowo, and this is essentially our first episode since August 2nd, when Congolese communities around the world and even friends of the Congo, people that support the Congo, commemorated GENOCOST. And I think there is something important about returning to this program after August 2nd. Um, because Genocast cannot simply be something that we commemorate once a year, genocide for economic gain. Um, Memory has to inform how we essentially understand what is happening in the Congo today. When we say truth, justice, dignity, memory, these were essentially all the themes that the Congolese Action Movement platform and the Congolese civil society explored during the Genocast over the years. But those cannot simply be words associated with a commemoration. They have to mean something. They have to become principles through which we examine our country. And and we have to become we have they have to become principles through which we examine our country. And since August 2nd, several development have essentially forced us to confront some very difficult questions. What does justice actually look like for the Congo? Where does peace look like? Can we negotiate peace while simultaneously pursuing accountability? Can essentially the Congolese uh, states, the Congolese government, um, the Congolese leadership defend its sovereignty externally while preserving democracy internally? And then finally, ultimately, are we addressing the structural causes of the Congo crisis? Or are we once again simply managing its symptoms? Today, I want to begin with two developments in particular. The first is the Democratic Republic of the Congo's attempts to bring Rwanda before the International Court of Justice. This is huge, I will say. The second is the continuing negotiations involving the Congolese government and the AFC M23, the Rwanda-backed militia, including in a recent release of 15 detainees as part of the ongoing peace process. So 15 folks from the M23, from the Rwanda-backed militia, were released by the Congolese government, and it's 15 out of about a list of, I think, 500, I believe. And I want to begin with the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, because I think there is considerable confusion about what is actually happening. So for decades, and it's very important to kind of like talk about that history, because for decades, the Congolese people have demanded accountability for what has happened in our country, what has happened in the Congo, because of what has happened in the eastern part of the Congo. We have had investigations after investigations. We have had reports, the United Nations report, countless of them since the year 2000. We've had the mapping report, the mapping exercise report. We have reports from the UN group of experts. We've had sanctions. We've had Security Council resolutions. We've had statements from government around the world. But one thing has essentially remained remarkably difficult, and I have to be frank, is this is what has been the number one roadblock to peace in the Congo. It is accountability. And today, Congo is attempting to move that battle into another arena, international law. Not that he hasn't tried before, he has. But I think it's important for us to understand exactly what that means. First, the International Court of Justice is not the International Criminal Court. And I am no lawyer here, you know. Um, I speak from what I know, from what I've read. I have an engineering background. Been doing activism for almost 5 years now. But I'm going to speak from the perspective of the Congolese person, son, who has been following the Congo and reading reports to document myself and also be able to understand what is going on and what can we do, what can be done for accountability to take place. So we have the International Court of Justice, the same court, the same institution that right now is, I guess, going through documents for the Israeli case. South Africa brought a genocide case against Israel to the ICJ, so it's the same the International Court of Justice. And then we also have the International Criminal Court, which the ICC, which also brought forward some criminal charges against the not the states, because the ICJ goes after states, but after individual. And in this case, same case, we are talking about um, some leadership, a member of the leadership of the Israeli government, including current Prime Minister of Israel. But these two institutions, again, like I'm trying to explain very carefully, are constantly confused, right? These two institutions are constantly confused. And I used to be one of those people that will misuse or misrepresent what these two means. The ICC, like I was saying, prosecutes individuals for international crimes within its jurisdiction. And I think that's the key word right there. It's jurisdiction. The ICC, International Criminal Court, prosecutes individuals. And that is the institution that prosecuted individual for the case of the Congo, like Thomas Lubanga or even Bosco Tanganda, the founder, I would say, of M23, M23, the 2013-2012 version. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, is different. The International Court of Justice deals with legal disputes between states. So this is not fundamentally about whether Paul Kagame personally goes to prison, right? It is about whether the Rwandan state, Rwanda as a country, can be held internationally responsible for violation of international law. And I think that distinction right there is extremely important as we are speaking about accountability in the Congo. But there is another question that Congolese should be asking, of friends of the Congo, you all watching this right now, should be asking. If Rwanda's involvement in Congo has been documented for decades, why now? Why not last year? Why not 2 years ago? Why not 10 years ago? Why wasn't Rwanda successfully brought before the ICJ years ago? And here we arrive at one of the most, I would say, misunderstood aspect of international law. It is very messy and very political, I would say. And that's the key word that I mentioned earlier, jurisdiction. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, does not automatically have jurisdiction simply because serious allegation exists, right? It's very important to point that out, that the states must have accepted the court's jurisdiction through legal mechanism, an applicable legal mechanism. And I believe that is the one reason, or that is one of the reasons, Congo's earlier attempt to pursue Rwanda before the ICJ encountered major jurisdictional obstacles. And this is also why we have to be careful about creating unrealistic expectations today. Um, Filing a case is one thing. Establishing jurisdiction is another. Winning on the merits is another. And obviously, obtaining meaningful implementation is another challenge altogether. So we know something about this from our own history, I will say, because Rwanda is not the only country or the first country that the Congo has brought in from the court, the International Court of Justice, ICJ. So I will be referring to the International Court of Justice as ICJ. So because Congo has already gone down this road with Uganda. The DRC brought Uganda before the International Court of Justice, before the ICJ. And in 2005, the court found Uganda internationally responsible for violations arising from its military activities on Congolese territory. Again, keep that in mind because we had countries, a nation, Uganda, that not just invaded the Congo, but also occupied a full territory with its people and was responsible of atrocities there, of plundering there, of what the Congolese people are now saying or calling GENOCOST, right? Years later, the reparations phase resulted in, I would say, an amount of money requiring Uganda to compensate the DRC. I think that that judgment is historically significant. Historically significant. But it also teaches us something interesting, that international justice is extraordinarily slow. It is a slow process, a very slow process. And a judgment does not magically repair a country. So while Friends of the Congo welcome every credible legal mechanism capable of advancing accountability for the Congo, we think that we have to resist two extremes. The first extreme is cynicism, right? That the international law has never helped us, therefore this means nothing. That's one, I would say, thesis that we do not accept. That the legal records matter. It is very important that judgment matter. Establishing state responsibility matters. Documenting crimes matter. Memory, that's what CAYP, Congolese Action Platform, has been talking about. Memory, being able to conserve archived evidence, facts. Creating jurisprudence matters. Enforcing government to defend their action before international courts matters. But the opposite extreme is equally dangerous, I would say, because believing that filing a case means justice has already been achieved is also false, because it hasn't. The Congolese government will still have to establish a viable legal basis for the court's jurisdiction. And that's on the Congolese government's responsibility to do that. You will have to present evidence, solid evidence. We have to establish facts that the violations alleged under the legal instruments invoked. That's the job of the Congolese government, led today by President Tshisekedi. And the Congo will have to demonstrate why those violations are attributable to Rwanda. And even if Congo ultimately succeeds, the question of implementation will remain. Because if the Congo succeeds, we're gonna see, just in the case of Uganda, some sort of reparation. We're gonna see financial compensation happening. And this is why I believe that this case, I view this case as one component of a much, much larger architecture of justice. Because the ICJ alone cannot deliver everything Congolese victims are demanding. Let's just be truth. And then I was in a space a couple of weeks ago with one of the co-founders of Congolese Action Platform. She's also our European coordinator, Mimi Witenkate, that I salute. She was saying that what would $500, $1,000, $2,000, whatever that compensation for victims mean to the family? They just lost someone, and talking about herself, she lost her sister. What would money really mean? Will that really replace the pain, the suffering, and the absence of that loved ones in their lives? No, absolutely not. The money does not replace that. The money or the reparation does not replace that. Is important, but it's also important to also realize that for them to sleep at peace at night is knowing that the people responsible for that are behind bars, right? So we need to distinguish different forms of responsibility here. That there is a state responsibility, that there is individual criminal responsibility, that there is the international criminal courts where its jurisdiction applies, that there are Congolese domestic courts. The Congo doesn't need to wait for the international community to start judging Congolese people who have been responsible for the massacre, who participated, who joined movements that are or have been allegedly accused of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and potentially genocide on their mapping reports and countless of other reports put out by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and even the UN Group of Experts. That these Congolese folks are still currently residing in the Congo. They are even occupying or holding office in the Congo. There are ministers right now, ambassadors. So of course we also have that foreign domestic jurisdiction that under specific circumstances may exercise forms of universal jurisdictions over international crimes. We saw that with Spain, and we talked about this on the show when Spain issued an arrest warrant against 40 Rwandan military officers, including Paul Kagame himself. So, and there remains a long-standing discussion, I would say, about establishing a specialized international or hybrid mechanism for crimes committed in the Congo, particularly given the enormous number of alleged atrocities that fall essentially outside the temporal jurisdiction of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the same institution that actually goes after individuals. And this is where I come back to GENOCOST. Why Congolese people wanted to challenge the genocide, the Commission for Genocide, because they believed, or we believe, that it is incomplete. Because if you think about that, if we have to talk about the intent, and go back to the definition of genocide, why we wouldn't consider the slave trade as a genocide, right? And that's why there is really a limitation to that. Because genocide right now is being defined. Genocide means any of the following acts committed, and I'm reading directly from the UN website, the Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, Article 2. The genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. National, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. Killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to member of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another. Why isn't slave trade considered as a genocide? There's a lot of limitation in this definition. And I'm no lawyer. I'm not an international lawyer. I'm not. But to me, it's crazy that something as big as a slave trade that has been documented and how Africans, Black people were reduced to a thing, properties, women being used for experiments, medical experiments. Go read Medical Apartheid. Colonialism, when we talk about the exploitation of African countries by Africans for obviously imperialist for Western countries. Why all these deaths are not considered as genocide? The intent was clear. Because when you go back to the law of these countries, they did not even consider Black people as human beings. So that's why in that context that those group of Congolese, young Congolese 13 years ago, sat down and read these and opposed to what was happening, to juxtapose with what was happening to the Congolese people since Leopold II in 1884, and said that this definition, this Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, does not does not speak justice, does not do justice to what has been happening to the Congolese people, and in even broader, to African people, to Black people, to people who have been victim of a Genocost because of what they have under their soil, because of the resources, because of exploitation, because of extractivism, because of capitalism. And that's why it's important for Congolese to understand why memory must produce documentation. They went challenged to say we need to expand this definition, create something that will be able to encompass what has been happening to Black people in the heart of Africa. So the documentation must support accountability. Accountability must lead toward justice, and justice must contribute to I would say, repetition. But here's where the situation becomes a little bit complicated, because while Congo is attempting to pursue Rwanda through international law, the Congolese government is simultaneously negotiating peace with the AFC M23. And I know that they have in no position to fight. I know the Congolese government has a weak army. They hire mercenaries, folks involved in war crimes overseas, with Eric Prince accused of allegedly committed war crimes in the war in Iraq. They hired mercenaries from Eastern Europe, paying them $3,000 to $5,000 a month, when a Congolese soldier was getting paid $100 before that. They changed it to $500. I cannot confirm that. That's what was said. But think about it, $100 to $500 a month, while a mercenary get paid $3,000 to $5,000 a month, with room on board included. So the Congo has no leverage, and I do understand that. But you cannot be negotiating peace. You cannot be negotiating peace, but at the same time condemning folks for, I guess, siding with the with the M23, discussing M23. We have young Congolese people today that are being jailed because they are challenging the Congolese narrative. And that brings to the second major development of today's, I would say, episode, which is the M23 and the Doha and the price of peace. Who is paying the price? The Congolese government released 15 detainees in connection with confidence building measures surrounding the peace process. And immediately after that decision generated debates. I mean, why would you free 15 folks that belong officially join a rebel, a Rwanda-backed militia that has killed thousands in the past few years, displaced millions, but then internally you are going to restrict the freedom, the free speech of folks who are challenging a narrative, journalists who are speaking about former President Kabila. You are going to sentence a former president to death over rumors, because we all saw the trial. They had no evidence. Yes, the United States sanctioned Kabila and say that they are sanctioning Kabila for essentially joining him. But I do think, because again, when you look at the evidence, nothing, absolutely nothing points to President Kabila, former President Kabila, financially supporting M23. On contrary, we have tremendous of evidence pointing President Kagame financially supporting M23. The Rwanda, the state, the government of Rwanda, Rwanda as a country, Rwanda as a state, has been financially supporting rebel groups. They have been destabilizing the Congo. We have known that for years. It has been documented. Global Witness documented that. Human Rights Watch documented that. Amnesty International documented that. Yet there is not a single sanction against Paul Kagame directly. So some Congolese, when they see the Congolese government releasing 15 detainees, some Congolese see diplomacy in there. Others see capitulation. Some see a necessary confidence building measure, I mentioned that, and others see another armed movement receiving concessions after taking up weapons against the states. And if you ask me what I think, I'm confused. I am genuinely confused because I do not know the policy of the Congolese government when it comes to this war. Are we having an offensive policy with the goal of, or the objective of, liberating those territories that are under occupations? And if we are leading an offensive campaign, what are we doing with the army? Are they paid good? Are we effectively extracting those soldiers that are involved in mass atrocities, in war crimes? Those generals and people in the military that have loyalty to Rwanda or to other militia groups because they are benefiting for the crisis. I am confused. And I can understand why other folks will be also confused, but most importantly, frustrated. Because Congo has been there before. Over and over and over again. Think about the history of the Congo. For those who don't know, the Lusaka Accord in the late 90s, the Sun City Accord that led to Accord Global et Inclusive, that literally with the Pretoria Accord later on. But the Sun City is really what gave birth to the historical government, one president and four vice presidents. All of them used to be part of a neighborhood country's backed militia. Joseph Kabila, former president sentenced to death at the time he was the president. He overtook, he started leading the country after his father died, but both he and his father arrived in power through the AFDL, a Rwanda-backed militia. So you have him, Joseph Kabila, as the president. You have Jean-Pierre Bemba. He's currently minister in the Congo. He was the vice president at the time. How did he become a vice president? He was a leader of a movement, a rebel group backed by Uganda, MLC. And then you had Yerodia Abdoulaye Ndombasi. May his soul rest in peace. How did he get there? He represented, I would say, Kabila's father. So he also arrived in power through the rebellion. So he was part of the same rebel group backed by Rwanda. Then you had Azarias Ruberwa, the leader of the RCD, another Rwanda-backed militia that led Eastern Congo or occupied Eastern Congo and precisely Goma for almost 5 years, from 1998 all the way to 2002, 2003. His group was backed by Rwanda. And then Zaidi Ngoma, that was supposed to represent the civil society, he also was part of the RCD for a shorter period of time, but still, he had been part of the RCD, the same movement that was backed by Rwanda. So you had one president and four vice presidents, all of them. They were part of an armed group backed by foreign forces. So Lusaka, Sun City, Pretoria, the agreement involving the CNDP, because after the RCD was born, the CNDP, and after the CNDP was born, what we now know as the M23, the March 23 movement. Because the March 23rd, 2009 agreement is the agreement from which the M23 would eventually derive its name, M23. Then from there, we have Nairobi, we have Luanda, we have Washington, and now we have Doha. Every generation of Congolese seems to inherit another peace agreement. The mapping report that I spoke earlier maps out 617 incidents, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, from 1993 to 2003. Today we're in 2026, so the atrocities continue. I'm about to be 33 years old. I have not seen, so can you imagine, for the past 30 years, that country has never seen peace. And I'm not talking about peace as the absence of guns, the absence of bombings. I'm talking about peace as merely the presence of justice. Because justice is not another ceasefire. Justice is not a declaration of principles. Justice is not another roadmap. Justice is not another mechanism. Justice is not monitoring committees. Justice is accountability. So there is a more difficult question to then ask: if for the past 3 decades, 30 years or plus, 33 years. If I have to start in 1993, because that's when those atrocities in mapping report start. What if Congo's problem is not the absence of a peace agreement? What if the problem is that those agreements repeatedly fail to address the structural forces producing conflicts? Because yes, a ceasefire can stop shooting temporarily, but a ceasefire does not automatically resolve foreign interference. It does not dismantle illicit economic network. Because the former Secretary of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, in 2000, 2001, he was talking about what was happening in the Congo. He talks about this illicit economic network as a systemic and endogen, exogen, how do you say that in English? Exogen and endogen exploitation. Endogen. Yes, it's English. Okay. Indigenous and exogenous exploitation. That's Kofi Annan in 2001 in a letter to the UN Security Council. And Antonio Guterres in 2008, he said, and that was reported to the Financial Times, that the international community has systematically plundered the Congo. So there is a network that does not just point toward Rwanda. It does not point toward the United States. It points toward all the actors, all the foreign forces. Because the current UN secretary said the international community systematically plundered the Congo. So a ceasefire does not dismantle that network, nor does it build a functioning Congolese state. It doesn't. A ceasefire does not end impunity. It doesn't reform the security sector and the end of mercenaries practices which are, by the way, illegal under international law. It does not restore displaced communities, folks who have lost their houses, folks who cannot go to school. And it certainly doesn't automatically provide justice for victims. And this is where the release of the 15 detainees has to be understood carefully. In peace negotiations around the world, confidence building measures are 100% normal. 100% normal. And those who also are following closely what has been happening between Israel and Palestine and Gaza, it happens. Prisoners are exchanged. Detainees are released. Humanitarian corridors are established. Governments do make concessions. Armed movements make concessions. So negotiation itself requires compromise. So the fact that the detainees are released is not by itself evidence of betrayal. The more important question is, what is Congo receiving in return? I think that's what we need to ask. What is Congo's receiving in return? Is there reciprocity? Like, are we also going to hear the M23 releasing citizens that they have imprisoned, soldiers that have captured? Are commitment being implemented? Are occupied areas being restored to Congolese state authorities? Are civilians being protected? Are the displaced population able to return home safely? Are institutions of the Congolese states being restored? Is foreign military involvement ending? I think those are the measurements that matter, because the DRC cannot evaluate another peace process simply by counting signatures. And we have been experts in that, signing without even reading. Sometimes I wonder if they even read what they sign. The RDF being 100 kilometers inside the Congolese borders is a defensive measure. And when we go there and they sign, yes, it is. The FDLR, which according to the Congolese government is a national threat, is a threat to national security to Rwanda, is mentioned 42 times. 43 times, my apologies, 43 times. But the M23, which is also a, a national security threat for the Congo, is only mentioned 3 times, the third time being in the glossary. At the very end of the documents, where there is all the words and definitions, they're going to mention M23 and explain what that means. This is the third time the M23 is mentioned. So we have to evaluate results of those agreements being signed. And there's another tension here that deserves much more attention, I would say, is peace versus justice. I could even say peace versus liberation. What happens when someone accused of serious crimes become necessary to a peace negotiation? Do you negotiate with that person? Do you prosecute that person? This is literally the man that was commanding a group that raped hundreds of women, burned down 160 women in a prison. What do? Do you prosecute that person? Do you negotiate with that person because they happen to be the head of an armed group, or do you do both? I don't think it's an easy answer, but there is no easy answer. And that's why it's important to even know the framework of those peace agreements. What are we willing to compromise on? What are we willing not to compromise on? History shows up example of where negotiations helped end wars. History also shows us examples where impunity simply prepared the ground for the next war. That has been the case for the Congo. The Congo is the case by excellence. AFDL, peace agreements. Then the RCD will be born from the East. Peace agreements. Then the CNDP will be born, still from the East, backed by Rwanda. Peace agreements. Then the M23 will be born, still backed by Rwanda. And now we have M23 2.0 with AFC, led by Corne Nanga, because they're trying to Congolize, make a foreign occupation, a foreign arms intervention as a Congolese rebellion, just like it was done for the AFDL when Kabila's father got to power in 1997. So if every generation learns that taking up arms gives you access to negotiations, positions, power, integration, and political relevance, let's be frank, what incentive are we creating? What incentive are we creating? I don't think it means that we should necessarily reject negotiation. I think that we should always open the door for peace before weapons. But it means that negotiation must be designed around a very important principle. that peace cannot simply mean the absence of gunfire. Sustainable peace requires institutions. It requires justice. It requires sovereignty. It requires economic transformation. It requires political legitimacy. Otherwise, we're not solving the conflict. We're just postponing it to later. And that brings me back to this concept, this brilliant concept of GENOCOST. August 2nd was chosen symbolically as a date because you need a date. If August 2nd means anything, it should remind us that victims cannot continually become an afterthought in negotiations supposedly designed to end their suffering. You cannot. Where are the victims? Where are displaced communities? Where are the women survivors? Where are local civil society organizations? Where are Congolese youth? And where is the discussion about reparations? Where is accountability? And where is the conversation about preventing the next armed movement from simply replacing the current one? Those questions should accompany, I think, every peace agreement, because 30 years of negotiations have taught us something very, very clear. That the Congo does not need another agreement that simply manages the crisis. And trust me, friends of the Congo, we have been there since 2004. We understand that Congo needs a political architecture capable of ending the condition that reproduce it. And that brings us to, I would say, today's conversation. I had the honor to invite back, because he has been a regular, our executive director, Maurice Carney. Because Maurice Carney, as the executive director, he has been advocating for the Congo for over 3 decades, and even way before he co-founded Friends of the Congo. Because while Congo is confronting enormous challenging externally, there are equally important questions emerging internally. What kind of state are we really building? What kind of democracy do we want for the Congolese people? And what happens when constitutional reform, because that's what has been trending, becomes one of the dominant political conversations, while a significant portion of the national territory remain affected by the conflict? And what happens when a country already confronting war, displacement, political instability, must respond at the same time to another public health emergency, the Ebola outbreak? Don't forget about that. The UN said, the World Health Organization said that one person dies of Ebola every 30 minutes. That's about 50 people. Essentially in a day. So to kind of help discuss again, like I was saying, I sat down this morning with brother Maurice Carney. Is our executive director. He spent decades speaking, studying, explaining, and advocating around the Congo. He spent more than 2 decades, I would say, working to bring the Congo crisis to international audiences, while at the same time consistently emphasizing the Congolese agency. sovereignty and self-determination. And instead of trying to cover every headline, I would say our conversation really focused heavily on two issues that I believe deserve serious attention. The first conversation was a debate surrounding constitutional reform and the political direction of the country. It's very interesting, very compelling what Brother Maurice had to say about that. And the second was the Ebola, the public health, and what recurring health emergencies tell us about the capacity of the Congolese state. So, without further ado, let's get into that conversation. Um, I'm going to place right now my interview with Maurice Carney, the Executive Director of Friends of the Congo. Uncovering truth, amplifying voices. This is Congo Unfiltered. Brother Maurice, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks. How about yourself?
I am good. I'm good.
Excellent.
So just to get started real quick, one thing that really history teaches us, and that's kind of like talking about the constitutional reform in the Congo, is that peace abroad is very difficult to sustain when politics at home becomes increasingly prioritized. So as negotiations continue over Eastern Congo, another battle is really unfolding in Kinshasa, and we're not even talking about guns per se, but over the constitution. President Tshisekedi has once again expressed his desire to reform the constitution, and political tensions between the government and parts of the opposition continue to intensify. I think today was actually the deadline for the opposition to, they were waiting for the president to publish an presidential communique, I guess, a statement calling for a dialogue, a national dialogue, and if that wasn't done today, they were going to resume with mass protest. So supporters here argue that the institution needs to evolve, and critics here fear that this is less about reform and more about power. So, Brother Moise, I would like to step back from and I kind of like ask you a broader question. So, when we hear the phrase constitutional reform, what should citizens actually think about?
I'll let you write. Thank you, Gaëtan. That's a good question. You know, the Constitution that we're talking about. You know, it's kind of interesting, Gaëtan, because it's not really about the Constitution, right? I think that's important. You know, for folks who are out there listening and trying to figure out or watching, trying to figure out what's this all about. It's really not about the Constitution. It's about a president and a political class trying to stay in power beyond the presidential mandate, 2 5-year terms, right? Which for President Tshisekedi expires in 2028. So, interestingly enough, Gaëtan, whether we talk about the peace agreements that's been established under President Tshisekedi with Donald Trump and Paul Kagame, and the M23, or the strategic partnership mineral deal between the United States and the DRC government, one constant in these different events is the desire on the part of President Tshisekedi, to remain in power and its political class. So when we talk about the Constitution and a referendum, these are just instruments that the current political class, under the leadership of President Tshisekedi, instruments that they believe that they could use in order to extend their stay in power. You know, when it's kind of interesting. I was listening to Senga, one of the main opposition figures during the Constitution. You know, he was debating members of the presidential majority, and he may even have been on one of the spaces, and he talked about Article 220 of Congo's constitution, right?
Mhm.
And he made a point about that. He said that he remembered during the transition period when they were writing the constitution, and putting it in place, and he pointed out a figure. He mentioned Alufwele Mbui-Kalala, and he said it was Alufwele Mbui-Kalala, right, who was he was from the diaspora, parliament. He was in the Senate, who was responsible for ensuring that Article 220 is embedded in the Constitution, right? Alufwele Mbui-Kalala is a mentor of mine. This is about everything I know about the Congo I know from him, right? He was involved in the writing of the Constitution, and Gaëtan, this is in 2000. He as early as 2000, from 2003 to between 2003 and 2006, within that time frame, even as he was, and he was sharing with me, and I have the document, even as he was writing that constitution, and he, at the time he was doing a lot of research, he would like, Maurice, can you send us the, the U.S. a copy of the U.S. Constitution, the French, Benin's Constitution, right? South Africa. So they were pulling from different constitutions, the best elements of what they thought. And even after he was a part of the writing of the Constitution, Gaëtan, he wrote a document on the changes that are needed in the Constitution, right? Even before the Constitution was ratified in 2006. And even within when he had said to me, like, Maurice, it's kind of interesting. We're ratifying this Constitution, right? But it's not even available in the 4 national languages, right? So the people are ratifying something that they don't really fully understand. But he was in support of it. So so the point I'm trying to make is to respond to your question, that even the authors of the current Constitution, right?
Yeah.
They saw things that needed to be changed in it. However, that shouldn't be confused, right, with a president and a political class that's trying to instrumentalize the Constitution so that they can stay in power, right? That's fundamentally different from someone who's a part of the writing of the Constitution and goodwill, and want to see that the Constitution really is a social contract, right, between the people and its political leadership. So, people were going in with goodwill to say, well, we want to make sure that this social contract is solid throughout. And part of that being solid throughout is providing the people with the instruments in the law to hold their political leadership accountable. Because one thing that especially for the Congo, coming out of the Mobutu era, right? Then, a history of dictatorship, they wanted to make, these writers wanted to make sure that that didn't continue. They wanted to put an end to that. So we saw, Kabila, how he tried to circumvent it. He tried to circumvent it by exploiting a gray zone, right, in the Constitution that says that the new president can only take office after the old president goes out, so he stays in. And we talk about glissement. That was his strategy for maintaining power. And now that Tshisekedi is in power, he said, okay, we're going to do, organize a referendum and let the people speak, right? So, but underlying all of that, and I think it's so important for people, who are not familiar with Congolese politics, haven't followed politics a great deal, know that it's not about a referendum. It's not about the Constitution. It's about maintaining power, right? And if you again, you track this referendum effort, You track the peace deal, because the so-called Washington Accord that was signed between the DRC and Rwanda, it's insane, right? You know it,
Yeah.
right? Because it is talking about, it's got the Congolese government in a trap right now, because they're like trying to, demonstrate that they're doing something about the FDLR, right? Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, right? We
And I
have
think and
Florida.
I think that's probably another concern expressed by many Congolese
Mhm.
because of the timing. And you talking about that peace agreements, that Eastern Congo remains unstable, that millions remain essentially displaced, and peace negotiations are ongoing, and the country continue to face humanitarian crisis. So at a moment like this, I guess one a question is really a very crucial question is a constitutional reform truly the nation's most urgent priority? And to that,
Oh,
would you
obviously,
say?
obviously, it's not. The clock is ticking. 2028 it's like less than 2 years away. So they have to do something. They have to do it now, irrespective of what's happening with the Ebola outbreak, with the occupation in the East. It doesn't matter, right? The priority for the political class, is clear. We want to stay in power, and we want to stay in power by any means necessary, right? Which, even if it means, further, deepening the crisis and the chaos in the country. That's what it's about. And that's why, if you look at it's really interesting, because if you look at the tradition of Congo civil society, we're talking about,
Mhm.
civil society groups, we're talking about the church, Catholic Church in particular, represented by the Senko today. We see that they have a long history of democratic resistance. In a lot of respects, for people to understand it globally, you can almost put the Catholic Church in the category of liberation theology, right? How they stood up to Mobutu. We all remember February, 1992, how they stood up to Kabila, from 2015 to 2018. We had young people, Teres Kapingala, she was killed in the church, right? We had, the Kabila soldiers were going into church and firing on churches. So the Catholic Church, represented by Senko, is, we can really put them in that category of representing the interests of the people in the spirit, of the Father Romero's and liberation theology. So when the Catholic Church came out against the constitutional change, that sent shudders through the Tshisekedi, presidential majority, because they know better than anyone else the power of the church and organizing the masses. Because when they were resisting Kabila's attempt to stay in power, they were doing that in concert with the Catholic Church. So you can't underestimate the power of the Senko and the faith leaders, and then join that with the opposition figures. It's a tall order for Tshisekedi presidential majority to overcome that type of resistance. And they haven't even really started resisting yet. They just made an announcement, declaration,
Yeah,
right?
and that's already got them like all
Yeah,
like
because they
shaking.
know they're clear. They know the history of the Congo. They were shoulder to shoulder with the Senko, so they know the power of the Senko, right? It's just that when you have greed and avarice, and the famous Lord Acton quote, absolute power corrupts absolutely. They don't have absolute power, but they definitely corrupt. So that they're facing some forces, and that and people have been criticizing the opposition figures for uh, rescheduling marches. They were supposed to march on I think July 12th, and then they set another date. And I think what a lot of people are missing is that it's the church, the Senko, that's appealing to the opposition and saying, hold off, go and see Ndishame
Give the
in
dialogue a chance.
Burundi, right? And
Yeah.
say, hold off a little bit, because we're working a path here. So in deferring to the Catholic Church, right, the opposition says, okay, you're on board with us. You made it clear there isn't a need for a change of the Constitution, and you're not going to accept it. The Catholic Church, Senko, is categorical around that, right? So they're saying, okay, let's give your diplomatic approach the opportunity to work, because they know the opposition, they're imminently stronger, right, with the Catholic Church on their side, to be lockstep and barrel with the church. So I think people should take that into consideration when they critique. I don't think you can bring the normal critique to the opposition and say, oh, they're delaying because they want posts in the Tshisekedi administration. I don't think that applies in this instance, knowing that they are working closely with the church in their strategies, and that the church is on their side in terms of saying no to referendum, no to the change in the Constitution. So I think they should give the opposition a little more latitude in that regard.
And since you mentioned Burundi, and I would like to kind of like zoom out a little bit and broaden the discussion in beyond Congo, because across Africa we've seen constitutional reform produce very different outcomes. And you mentioned the constitution in Benin, for example, but in some countries reforms was used to essentially strengthen democratic institutions, and in other constitutional amendments, constitutional amendment became essentially associated with a prolonged, I would say, political crisis, which were which were contested election or increased polarization. So my question to you is, what lesson do you think? What lesson should the Democratic Republic of the Congo draw from the experiences of other African nations?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you asked that question. I don't know, right? If they could draw more from other African nations than they can draw from Congo's own history, right? I think it's so critical, and I don't believe we can overstate it, Gaëtan, is the democratic tradition of the Congo for the last 3 decades, right? The people have mobilized in a way, right, to demand that their voices be respected, right? I mean, really, just think about it. Kabila couldn't stay in power, right? And then he had his dauphin, right? Shadari. And he had control of the instruments of power, the security forces, everything, right? He had control of all that. So he could have really, said, okay, I'm going to install, Shadari as as my dauphin, right? As my successor, right? But because, I think he even admitted himself, or the people around him, but because the people were so resolute, they're like, we are through with you. We don't want you. We don't want your successor. We want a fresh start, right? So they put enormous pressure on Kabila. Unfortunately, one of the figures in the opposition cracked. And I was talking to some folks in the Congo, and they were like, because you remember, even before Kabila, fingered Tshisekedi to be their successor. You remember he had pulled like from the UDPS, right, already. He had Sami Badibinga as prime minister, I believe, and one other figure from the UDPS. So they're already pulling, instrumentalizing the opposition, right, with assigning prime ministership to different figures from UDPS. So the coup de grace was Felix Tshisekedi, where they, Kabila said, okay, we're going to go with Tshisekedi. It was the U.S. agreed with it. Kagame spilled the beans and named all of the other African presidents who agreed with it. But they confiscated the will of the people, right?
Mm.
In 2018, and maybe that gave them a sense, right? A sense that they could, continue to get away with, contravening the will of the people. But I don't think I don't think that they will be ultimately successful in that regard. So the history of the Congo itself, I think, is the best source for folks. For the young people can take, can look at Senegal back, I think it was
Mm.
2011, 2012, something like that, with Abdoulaye Wade, who came from the opposition, right, with the support of the young people. And then he said, well, okay, I want to stay in power, right? And the youth mobilized, right? That's where you get the hip hop artists and cultural workers, forming Yan Mar, right? Yan Mar mobilized the youth in order to resist Abdoulaye Wade. So Senegal is an interesting model, for young
Mm.
Congolese to follow. And you talk about different constitutional coups and all that we see, changes in constitution. We're in an era of neocolonialism, where we have these neocolonial leadership that serve foreign interests, international finance capital, at the expense of the people, particularly the youth, because the youth are the majority in many of these countries. Just having exchanges with young people on the continent, you in the 1950s and 60s, right? Young people rose up to smash the colonial system, right?
Mm.
You remember 1959, January 4th in the Congo, right? The martyrs march
Models.
in,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So today, the imperative for young people on the African continent is for them to rise up and smash the neo-colonial system, where they have these leaders that are in place who serve foreign interests, use instruments, constitutional coups, what have you, to maintain themselves in power, to feed their own bellies, and to provide unfettered access to Congo's riches to foreign governments, foreign corporations. So young people today in the Congo and Africa and different parts of Africa are facing similar forces that the young people faced in the 1950s. They're facing colonialism. Today, young people are facing neocolonialism.
Mm.
So I think if they're that mindset, that's probably a model, Senegal, in terms of a concrete model that young Congolese could follow. It didn't work too well in 2015 against Kabila, because Yan Mar and Ballet Citoyen, they came to the Congo, and Kabila smashed them. What is interesting, right? A number of the young people that Kabila either jailed, right, or ran into exile, they're now in the Tshisekedi
Aligning with,
administration, right?
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
They're there, right? We won't name them, but the people,
It, it's really interesting because you also find some of them now in the Kabila camp, Save the Congo. It's very
right.
interesting.
It's very
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah. I mean,
I think
Kabila
I think
killed their
Congolese politics,
comrades. He killed their
Congolese,
comrades, and they're with him, right?
yes,
So
Congolese politics is very toxic, very very
yeah,
toxic.
yeah. So what that says is that um, it's more about what people are against, and not so when they're
They support,
mobilizing against,
yeah,
and not what
mm-hmm.
they're organizing for, right?
Yes,
So
yep,
there's really an absence of ideology, because if you have ideological grounding, you wouldn't be either with Kabila or with Tshisekedi, right? You carve out a space where you're with the people, because it is because, in large part, because of the pact between these two leaders, that we see Congo in the political crisis that it's in today. They absconded, they with the people's votes in 2018.
mm-hmm.
It's really fascinating. You could really, if you wanted to go on a track, you could put Carney, Nga with Congo River Alliance and M23, right? Former, head of the Electoral Commission. Then you have Joseph Kabila, who's the president, and then you have Tshisekedi, and the three of them got together and they decided, what the future of the Congo is going to look like in concert with the neighboring presidents and foreign governments. So they really lifted the voice of the Congolese people. And these three figures are still in the space. So really, as long as that type of leadership is in the space, it's pretty challenging for the people. The people have to get to another level of organizing in order to create the new Congo that they want to see. And it's a Congo that speaks to the interests of the Congolese people, where you don't have 80% of the population living on less than $3 a day, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In a country that's the largest producer of cobalt in the world, in a green energy, artificial intelligence, fourth industrial revolution, economies, right? A country that's the second largest producer of copper behind Chile, right? Just those two, a country where you have one of the largest, finds of lithium, hard rock lithium in the world, right? And even Gaëtan, if you were to shut down the mining sector, say you wouldn't even deal with mining, right? According to the Food and Agricultural Organization, a country that can produce food to serve 2 billion people, right? That's just in the agricultural sector. And then the energy, whether you're talking about hydro energy, solar energy, you name it. So the leadership that's in place, it's really scandalous, the extent to which they are, they have the Congolese people trapped, living in bestial conditions on top of soil that is arguably the wealthiest in the world, both in terms of, mineral wealth and agricultural capacity, agricultural capacity, and even energy, right? So I think once there's a critical mass of Congolese who recognize like the extent to which they're being trapped by their own leadership, and they're being deprived of the basics. Once that consciousness hits, I think they'll run the political class. They'll clean house with the political class, without a doubt.
And I only have 20 minutes with you, so I want to take the time to also speak about Ebola. But before we move to that conversation, hypothetically, right? Like if this constitutional reform does or had to move forward, what principles should every Congolese citizen insist upon? And that's regardless of whether they support the government or the opposition. So, in other words, I guess my direct question to you is, what should never be compromised?
I mean, I think the answer is there already. It's in the current constitution. It's that accountability to the people, where from Congo's history, the people are clear that they're not going to support another dictatorship. They'll have one. They're not going to have the personalization of power in perpetuity. And I think that there's a consensus, right? A critical consensus around that. So, and this is what it's all about, right? Not only from the opposition, but also from the Catholic Church itself, which represents civil society. So the people have rallied around that principle of transition of power, accountability of the leadership to the people in terms of the mandate, right?
And I can read really quick Article 220, Article 220 of the Constitution that says that the Republican form of the state, the principle of universal suffrage, the representative form of government, the number and the duration of the mandates of the President of the Republic, the independence of the judicial power, and political and trade union pluralism cannot be made the object of any constitutional revision. Any constitutional revision having for its object or for its effect the reduction of the rights and the freedoms of the persons, or the reduction of the prerogatives of the provinces and the decentralized territorial entities, is formally prohibited. That's Article 220 of the DRC Constitution.
Yeah, and that's the roadblock, that this whole debate, this referendum is about to get around that, and I think it's so important for people, again, and it's worth repeating, for people outside the Congo, and people watching and seeing what's unfolding in the political scene, to clearly understand it's not about a referendum. It's not about the need to change the constitution. It's about a political leadership class that wants to maintain its privileges, wants to maintain its power by any means necessary at the expense of the people. So I think it's so critical for that to be stated, restated, articulated clearly, over and over again, and to avoid the weeds of these different debates that are taking place.
I think today's conversation with you was about the democratic governance, but also, in some extent, what justice and peace look like in the midst of the negotiations and the constitutional reform being undertaken by the Congolese government. But there's another reality confronting millions of Congolese that receives far less international attention.
Mm-hmm.
And every few years, we see the headlines return, right? Like Ebola in Eastern Congo. The world reacts, they talk about it, emergency funding is mobilized, international health organizations respond, but then silence, right? In terms of really what the response should really look like for the impact of the scale of the urgency of the pandemic. So why does Eastern Congo remain so vulnerable to recurring public health emergency, especially within the context of Ebola?
Yeah, and it's not solely Eastern Congo. I was speaking to some folks and some journalists, and we were having a discussion around the Ebola outbreak and its impact on local communities. And I was for a number of reasons, we it's important to frame it within the context of a colonial legacy and a neo-colonial state, because the colonial legacy of the Congo has weakened its institutions, especially when you consider that a 3-decade dictatorship that was installed by the U.S. and maintained by the U.S. Followed that colonial legacy, right? So it really weakened tremendously the local institutions. That's why one of the biggest challenges of the Congo is institutional capacity, the strengthening of institutions. So within that neo-colonial legacy, weakening the infrastructure, education, road, technology, health, right? Then it leaves the people vulnerable, not just to Ebola. If you look at cholera, if you look at any of the other diseases that's ravaging the Congo, we see that the people are exposed because of that weakened infrastructure. Now, when we look at the Ebola outbreak, what is one of the saddest things about it, right, is that, well, let me say something more about the colonial legacy around the Ebola outbreak as well, because what just looking at it globally, it is considered to be something that's particular to the Congo and is stigmatized, right? There's this notion that there's something that Congolese people have done and continue to do to bring this up on themselves, right? There is that. If we talk to church leaders, media folks outside of the Congo, around trying to mobilize support for frontline groups who are organizing to prevent the spread of the virus. And there's this resistance there, right? There's this lack of empathy, lack of concern. Like, okay, this is a Congo. This is, this is the fate of the people there. That's it's been normalized that 50 people can die a day, as the case it is the case now, from outbreak of in this case Ebola, and then that's their problem. They're somehow the Congolese people are somehow at fault, right? Now it doesn't help that in the middle of this outbreak, Gaëtan, as we've seen, that the commander in chief, we're not just talking about the military, we're talking about the head of state, is in the midst of this sneaking off to go watch a football match in Europe.
Yeah.
And then after that, running to the United States for the opening of the World Cup.
World
right?
Cup.
And during this period, since May, didn't issue one single address to the nation, right? About this Ebola outbreak. So people looking from the outside, if your own president is not making it a priority, why are you asking us, somebody who's like, thousands of miles away from the Congo, to make it a priority? Right?
And I gave a hard time to the head of the World Health Organization for not speaking directly to the Congolese people as he has done for the people of Spain when that virus broke out. I forgot the name of that virus. But then I was like, well, you ended up doing it. You ended up putting out a statement. You ended up actually coming physically in the Congo and visit those centers, those places that are ravaged by the Ebola. But the Congolese president hasn't.
Just think about that, Gaëtan. I mean, you have the head of the World Health Organization, right? Dr. Tedros, right? Comes to the Kinshasa, goes to Bunia, and tells the people, they're like, we're with you. Before the president of the Congo itself. And then the president announces, I don't know, 2 or 3 months after, I'm going to come and be with you. The clock is ticking. Folks have bets running. They're like, okay, is he actually going to do it? Is he going to go to Ituri? Is the president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo that's presiding over what is on the path to being the worst Ebola outbreak in history, the fastest in history as right now, is he going to go and say, and be with the people who are facing the brunt of it? Is he going to say to his health minister, whatever they have to do, listen, I want you to, whatever you have to do, just like you provided money, millions of dollars to go give to European football teams, to purchase cars for the football players and Jeeps and all of that. Make sure our health workers are paid like today. Those who are on the front lines, right? Who are caring for the sick, who are in their lives or putting their lives on the line to ensure that the population is protected. I saw the saddest story that was shared by a Congolese sister on a video that's been circulating. You probably saw it. Congo's only neurosurgeon, Gaëtan, right, studied in Europe, is on the front lines providing support for the Ebola outbreak, and he died. Right. So it's taking the best that you have of your country. And you're telling me that the health workers have to demonstrate, have to have marches and strikes in order to get paid in the middle of an Ebola outbreak? That just shows, it shows you what the priorities are. The priorities staying in power and doing so by changing the constitution, but not the people. Not the people. So it's just really a sad statement on the political leadership, right?
And that brings a really good point, which I think is trust. That's the other issue, because public health, because of everything that you just mentioned, how, and I don't know what to say, absent the leadership of the Congo is. in the middle of a crisis, right? And it was really interesting, and some every time that I even think about it, I have tears because during the World Cup, I saw folks, people that literally spend their whole life in the United States, in Canada, in Europe. They literally have a different nationality, different passport. But when it
Mm,
comes to the Congo, they still felt like they had to come. They had to book that ticket, that flight ticket. They had to book that hotel. They had to purchase that ticket, even though we know now that there were free tickets available for the folks. But because of the mafia, and then a lot of tickets went unused. But folks felt like, you know what? It doesn't matter the color of my passport. It doesn't matter the nationality that I have right now. I still owe the Congo my presence. I still owe
mm,
Congo my support. But we cannot say the same for the leaders. A president who
mm,
doesn't think that he owes the people his presence when he
mm,
comes to be there and support them. So public
mm,
health really depends upon trust.
mhm,
Communities must trust doctors, trust nurses, trust
mhm,
public institutions, trust
mhm,
essentially the information that is circulating. Yet years after years of conflicts, um, the years of conflict that have essentially, understandably, created that deep skepticism toward authority in many
mhm.
communities. So it's interesting to see that regardless of all of that, that folks, I mean, not even regardless, because of all of that, folks have essentially lost. They have lost the trust in the leaders. So,
Mhm.
how important it is to you to rebuild trust when responding to public health emergency?
Well, we see it unfolding where, um, in the affected areas, those five, now six provinces, it's the local community that stepped up. The first responders, the neighbors, the local organizations. They're on the radio, they're in social media, they're going into the displacement camps. So I think that trust from the political class or the leadership, uh, I don't see that happening, right? It's the local people who are on the front lines, who are, purchasing the gloves, the masks, the hand washing machines, delivering them, making the announcements, doing the education over the radio, going, door to door, village to village. That's what we've seen, and that's what folks who in the East have reached out to us and say, hey, can you mobilize resources where we can ensure that they're getting directly to the local community? They're not going through any process that those funds may be diverted, and that's where we see the most effective response coming from those local, from the neighbors, the local organizations, the grassroots organizations, the local radios, young people in there using social media, whatever means they can to educate their folks in the communities, and that's what's being reported to us. We had the network of Congolese journalists led by Kilimali. They're reporting from Ituri and other affected, those five provinces, five, now six provinces, what people are saying on the front lines, how they're responding, and that's the message that's coming out.
Any final thoughts as we are
No,
closing?
we just, thank you, Kaita. I know it went by really fast. I'm sorry, I have to
It's
run
okay.
to another piece, so we have to pick up. But just for folks out there to in looking at the Congo, right? Just remind them that there's just tremendous agency and resilience taking place among the Congolese people, right? And for people to continue to stand, with the people, irrespective of what how the political class is responding, what the political class is saying, stand with with the people. And you stand with the people by doing several things. One, um, shaping the narrative that's out there, amplifying their narrative, right? And the narrative coming from the people is that we're taking action, we have local solutions, we're implementing them in spite of all of the obstacles and challenges in front of us. We're on the front lines. We're the first ones there if there's an Ebola outbreak. We're the first ones there if there's a volcanic eruption. We're the first one there if we're displaced from our villages because of Rwanda back in 23 or whatever. It is so vital for people to understand that narrative, and amplify that narrative, that the people are on the front lines, they're taking action, and it's with the people that we need to be in solidarity. So that's really the biggest message I like to share, and we do it every day, that we have a platform to let people know that with the Congolese people, there's hope, right? There's hope for a different Congo, a new future. Because when we speak to a lot of people, Gaëtan, they see it as a, they say it both. Some of them don't even say it outwardly. They see Congo as hopeless, and why even invest the time in being engaged in the Congo? And they're so far from the truth. That's the only way you can explain where millions of people have died in a space on this planet, and we don't see a commensurate response from the global community, from the family, our global family, because they don't see hope there. But we're here to tell you that there's tremendous amount of hope, tremendous amount of agency, tremendous amount of resilience, and just incredible work being done on the front lines by Congolese people, in spite of the narrative that's put out there.
Brother Maurice, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. Thank you, Gaëtan. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
And that was my conversation with Maurice Carney, the executive director of Friends of the Congo, our executive director. And as always, Brother Maurice brings us back, I will say, to something that can easily disappear when we follow Congo headline by headline. And these crises are interconnected. Think about everything we have discussed today. Internationally, Congo is attempting to use international law to pursue accountability. Diplomatically, Congo is negotiating with the AFC M23, while another attempts to end, one in another attempt, I would say, to end the conflict. Domestically, the country is debating constitutional reform and the future distribution of political power. And socially, Congo continues confronting enormous public health challenges, including Ebola. 4 stories. But underneath them is essentially one fundamental question. What kind of state is the DRC becoming? A state must be capable of defending its territorial integrity. A state must protect its citizens. A state must provide justice. A state must maintain institutions that are stronger than individual political leaders. A state must provide healthcare. A state must create economic opportunities. And above all, a state must earn the confidence of its people. That is ultimately why I think this conversation matters so soon after August 2nd. Because GENOCOST should never become simply an annual ceremony. I cannot emphasize this enough. But we cannot gather every August 2nd, say never again, honor our dead, and then return to political systems that continues producing victims, that continue to oppress our people, that continue to plunder the Congo, killed and displaced millions. At that point, memory without action becomes vain, essentially. But the purpose of memory must be transformation. When we remember the millions of Congolese who have suffered through decades of violence, our responsibility is not simply to tell their stories. Our responsibility is to build a country where those stories are not repeated. And that, my friends, requires justice. It requires peace, but it also requires democracy. It also requires accountable leadership. It requires functioning institutions. It requires a capable health system. It requires an economy that benefits Congolese people. And it requires something that perhaps matters more than anything else: Congolese agency. And this is what Friends of the Congo is about: uplifting those voices, amplifying those voices. The future of Congo cannot continually be negotiated in foreign capitals while Congolese people remain spectators. Washington cannot determine Congo's future. Doha cannot determine Congo's future. Brussels cannot determine Congo's future. Paris cannot determine Congo's future. London cannot determine Congo's future. Kigali cannot determine Congo's future. The international community can assist and must assist and should assist. It can mediate. It can provide resources. It can support justice. But ultimately, the future of the Congo must belong to the Congolese people. And that is the responsibility that also extends to those of us in the diaspora. Our role in the diaspora cannot simply to criticize from abroad. We have to organize. We have to educate. We have to document. We have to support the Congolese civil society that don't benefit the freedom of speech that we do. They don't benefit necessarily the access to information as we do. There is literally a threat right now of shutting down TikToks in the Congo. So we have to support folks on the ground. We have to help build institutions. We have to challenge misinformation, including misinformation that happens to support our own political preferences. We need to fight propaganda. And we must insist that accountability applies to everyone. It applies to foreign governments, armed groups, corporations, Congolese officials, opposition leaders, military officers, to everyone. Everyone, because justice that changes depending on who committed the crime is injustice. And sovereignty that only matters when foreigners violate it is insovereignty. So, as we leave today's episode, I want you all to remember four words that have become increasingly important to this program and to our broader work: truth, justice, dignity, and memory. Those four words are important. They have been the foundation of essentially the GENOCOST campaigns in the past 13 years. And there have also been the values that Friends of the Congo have been advocating, standing for the people. Because memory tells us where we have been. Truth forces us to understand why. And justice demands accountability. And dignity remind us who all of this is ultimately about, the Congolese people. I want to thank Maurice Carney for joining me. I want to thank all of you for watching and listening and sharing and continuing these conversations. This has been Congo Unfiltered, Beyond the Headlines, and I will catch you next time. Ciao.